So anyways, let's start out with your name. Where
Ron
you're from.
Murphy.
Okay.
I'm one of the owner partners here at 1984 Branson.
Okay. How long has this been here?
We opened up with our grand opening in June of 2019.
Okay.
So we've been here right at 2 years now.
Okay, nice. So you're relatively new. I have been coming to Branson for 30 years or so, and I never knew you guys were here.
Yeah.
So that makes sense, since you've only been around for 2 years.
2 years. And of course, one of those two was full-scale pandemic.
Yeah. So you've been around for 1 year.
So we've been around basically 1 year, and we're starting our second now instead of our third. That's correct.
So what's made you start an arcade in 2019?
Oh, that's a long story. The gist of it is I grew up in the 80s. And at the time I grew up, it was a crazy world as far as the arcades go. It was at the peak. I remember when Space Invaders first came out, and it was the most amazing thing I could ever have thought of. And then it wasn't long after that till Asteroids came out and Deluxe Space Invaders, and all of a sudden all the games were just flying as fast as they could be.
Pac-Man and Galaga came out, and then that was it.
It was a frenzy,
On.
and it was probably the best of times growing up. And I started college about the time that it was really gaining peak, and I went through college, didn't have much time for the arcades. By the time I got out of college, I started a job, and the arcade world had fell apart and disappeared. And I lived in Springfield, and there was a local group of guys there that opened a business, 1984 Springfield. And when they opened it, I felt kind of like I was back in heaven, right? All the games that I thought were gone were suddenly starting to show up. And I stayed in the corporate field a lot of years, and through those years I continued to go there, and I watched those guys continue to evolve, and I eventually got lucky and retired, and that went well for 4 years. And then I started getting the desire to get busy and do something. And after some crazy thoughts about going back into the corporate world, I was frustrated one night and went down there, and while I was down there playing pinball and games, I don't know exactly how it happened, but I was watching around, and everybody I saw was laughing and smiling and having a good time. And I remember thinking to myself, that's what I need to do. I need to do something like this where people are just enjoying life and bringing something back that's been forgotten. And so I went home, told my wife. She thought I was crazy, but she of course agreed to it, and I started talking to those guys, and about a year later we had all the plans in place and we opened the Branson location.
Wow.
So that's
a
long
so it's
story.
already an established business then.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's very cool.
Yeah, the Springfield location has been there a long time, probably 15 years or so.
Wow, okay.
So it's been there a while.
I'll have to go check that place out then.
Yeah, you'll like it a lot. It's a similar concept, 80s themed arcade.
Okay.
All the classic games, lots of pinball.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's a great place.
What is your favorite game?
Oh, wow.
I know that's the hardest question to answer,
So, I don't know if I'd say I have one. Probably the one that I used to be the best at would have been Centipede. I was decent at Donkey Kong, Miss Pac, Galaga, Missile Command, several of the games, but I've probably migrated now as much into pinball as I have the video games. So I'm kind of a guy that likes both sides.
Very cool.
But probably
Yeah.
Centipede would have been the one I might have been best at.
Centipede is
Very classic.
the grandfather of most shooters, and people don't even realize it. Like if you look at Centipede and the way that it's set up, most shooters after that, 1942, all those style shooters, comes from Centipede. And all the tactics of the bullet coming at you, you go the other direction, all that stuff, all comes from Centipede.
It's just a cool game.
Yeah, and it's just interesting to notice that. And as I've been playing games, I've been playing games my entire life as well, but I started on the NES. That was what I started on, and then as I got a little bit older, I started going to the arcades in Vegas. I grew up in California.
Okay.
So my parents would take me to Vegas, a couple times a year, and we would go to the massive arcades
Yeah,
and
very
the
cool.
Excalibur and the MGM and all
I
these.
remember those.
Yeah, all these places. So that was my experience of the arcade. That and going to local pizzerias or taco shops, and they had a Galaga or a Pac-Man
Sure.
or something. So that was basically my my upbringing. But I've absolutely loved video games. It's my favorite hobby. I'm also a musician and do a bunch of other stuff, but
Cool.
always come back to video games as one thing I can actually use to let me forget all my troubles, sort of thing.
Nope.
So
One of the best things about the games is when you start playing them, I don't
Yep.
care what's on your mind or what you're thinking about. If you're really playing the game,
Yep.
it's gone.
You're right.
You're just immersed
You
into
got something to
that, and
focus
that's
on.
all you think about. And so, when I was in college, because I grew up playing the games, I used to struggle with tests a lot, and mostly because I'd get nervous. And so I had an advisor, a professor one time that said, you need to find something to help you relax. And he said, what do you do for fun? And I'm like, well, I used to play arcade games. And he's like, great, we have a student union. Just an hour before your exam, just go over there, find you some video games, play games. So I did that, and lo and behold, everything started getting easier again. And it's just funny how
Nice.
it just relaxes you. Some people get really nervous and uptight when they play them, but after you play them a while, you just get in the flow of them. And it's just classic.
it's just just like you said, it lets you melt away. You can focus on just that game.
Yep.
Yeah. How many games do you have here?
Oh, let's
40
see.
or 50?
No, right now there's probably between 60 and 65 on the floor.
Kidding.
And not to give away any secrets of upcoming things, but you'll see some more coming out fairly soon.
Very cool.
And when we opened in 2019, we had around 40. And so now we've got 63 or 4, maybe 5. And so we've did a 50% add in 2 years, and we're nowhere near capacity as far as our space goes, so we'll definitely keep adding. I've got several that's on my list, and my back room's filled with.
You have a ton of space
Parts.
in here. If you went to straight rows,
We
you could
could-
double the capacity.
Yeah, not
for
a
sure.
problem at all. So
Yeah.
you can look for us to be growing every year.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Every time you come in, hopefully we'll have some new games.
Do you have any hidden gems in here?
I think they're all hidden gems because they're all our games are all original. They're all none of them are the emulated games. They're
Nice.
all the original '80s with TV picture tubes in them, and so we've got, I guess, some that are rarer than others. We've got one in the back that's extremely rare, and it bit the dust on us about 3 months ago. And the problem was it's so rare, nobody had schematics or a manual for it. And so luckily I found a guy that's pretty sharp with electronics, and he's just sent me a video, and the game is working and playing, and
Awesome.
he's mailing the board back, so we'll be rolling out. It's called Moonlander.
Moonlander.
It was made by Taito, the same company that did several games like Space Invaders and some of the others.
Yeah. Is that just the one where you're landing the ship on the ground, or that's the Atari game I'm thinking of?
Yeah, you may be thinking of Gravatar or something like that, but this one's one, it's quite unique. It's got some bases on the bottom, kind of like Missile Command, and it has a ship up above, and basically it releases a pod down to the ground. You have to guide the pod and avoid all the enemies and land it on a base. Little guys come across the bottom, jump in the pod, and then you have to thrust and fire and make your way back up to the ship at the top.
No kidding.
And you do this repetitively until you get all the people up to the top.
The game I'm thinking of is Lunar Lander.
Yep, there is
That's
a
the game
lunar
I'm
lander.
thinking of.
Yep.
So wow, so it's like Lunar Lander, but you have a little more intricacy to it.
So the game apparently is rare enough. If you're familiar with emulation, MAME is like the premier emulator, and everybody says MAME has all the games, but MAME doesn't have this game.
Doesn't have that one.
Yeah, at least last time we checked.
So somebody hasn't pulled it off the board.
Yeah, and so, but gyms are kind of a relative thing. We've got some people that love Vindicators, and we've got other people that like Altered Beast or Golden Axe. And so one of the things I've learned is everybody's kind of, for some reason, developed their own sense of what game's cool and special. And almost always, it's whatever game they spent time playing in their past and they got good at it. It was at the corner supermarket or at a local arcade or at a mall. And they just buried quarters in it, until they got so good at it. And then all of a sudden it was gone. And then they pop in here and they find it again. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you've got that game. And so it depends, right? The people my age, the 80s games appeals. We've got 1 or 2 90s games that for the next generation, the 90s games were bigger. And it just... But it's really cool that people have different feelings like that.
I've always said that we should never gone past 1985 to 1992 technology. Human race should not have been given technology past that. We shouldn't have, because that was really the pinnacle. We were at the pinnacle of analog technology.
It went downhill.
We were using digital as good as we should have, as good as we needed to for file organization and stuff like that. There was still talent, there was still ability in production. We weren't relying on templates constantly. We weren't relying on computers to create graphics. We were still artistically creating this stuff. And so, yeah, I really wish whoever gives us the technology, they held that back.
The old school skills are lost. Compact code, well-written code, things of that nature just really don't get hammered in like they used to. The speed of the new processors so overwhelm everything else that it hides all the bad things that are taking place. In the days here, you can't hide behind it. If you code bad, it's glaring.
When you got 8K of memory, you had to do some unbelievable magic to get everything to fit into that tiny chip.
It was a different world.
Yeah, it sure was. That's art. It really was. Yeah. Figuring out how in the heck to put all the pieces together.
But it was fun too.
Oh, super fun. Super fun.
The best part.
The very first machine I had was a TI. No, it was, TI-99, the Texas Instruments computer, home computer. I love that thing. I got it from a flea market or a garage sale. It was a garage sale. It had the voice synthesizer. I had tons of games. Even had a little music synthesizer. I would, or a music sequencer cartridge.
Oh, yeah.
And I would program Led Zeppelin songs, and I did like Black Dog in there and Heartbreaker and stuff. It sounded hilarious, but it was all I had.
Yeah, no, it was good stuff at the time.
To me, it was amazingly cool.
It was good stuff.
Yeah. It would, all that stuff's fueled the rest of my life. Everything that I've learned to do now, it all started from video games, pretty much.
When the game started using speech synthesis, I remember how awful it was and how amazing it was, both at the same time.
Yeah.
It's like, I think he said this, and it's like, how cool.
Yeah.
And it was neat to grow up in that new stage and get to see it evolve. And nowadays it's a lot more complex to realize what's going on. So.
Were you around in the time of the electromechanical arcades?
Yes.
Before they really turned to video arcades?
Yep. I played lots of the games. Most of them I used to play in those days. The arcades weren't that big, but you'd see them in Kmart's and Sears, in foyers and grocery stores sometimes. Helicopters that would roll around and submarines where you'd shoot missiles and it'd go down the screen.
It's just really cool ones. It's amazing how many of those were made.
Yeah, and there's a lot still around.
Crazy amount. I wonder if there are any electromechanical arcades around.
I don't think there's any per se arcades where they house lots of games. But there's a lot of private individuals that have the games. I see them for sale, and I'm amazed by them. But I haven't ventured into that. We've stuck pretty much in the start. We go from the late '70s, probably mid to late '70s, and then we venture in all the way through the '80s, and then we top out in the '90s. We don't have much.
Probably about '95 or so.
Yeah, we've got a few games, and most of them are. We call them stick and button games, where you move sticks and you hit buttons, and it followed the same pattern that you had throughout the 80s with all the popular games.
So you got a Neo Geo, so that's probably one
of the newer ones, yep. And we've got a Blitz, which is a newer game. And then this Marvel versus Capcom's a 90s game. Trying to think I'm sure there might be one or two more. And then in the 70s, we had, people don't think about it, but Space Invaders, maybe Asteroids were both early 70s games.
Yeah, 78, 79.
And so it all started then, and it just took off. And the thing that's most amazing to me is, and I was talking to a couple the other night up here about this, it amazes me how fast it happened, how big it happened, and then how fast it went away. And it was like, if you look around here, the bulk of the popular games came out in about a 4-year window, and the popularity of them went totally off the wall.
Home consoles killed it.
And
instantly.
I've tried to think of any other technology that happened like that, and I can't. People are saying, well, how about cell phones? Well, not really. We had bag phones, and then we had flip phones, and we finally got an iPhone, and that's like 10 or 15 years.
You know, they're insanely prevalent still, so no.
Personal computers, they've evolved.
Yeah.
But I mean, this went from nothing to insanity to nothing, like really quick.
It was one of those things where it was a pop culture phenomenon.
It was.
Right? It turned into a pop culture thing, and then it just died. As soon as the Atari came out, as soon as the Fairchild, the television, all these home consoles come out, everybody's like, why would I go to the arcade?
Yeah.
Well, it was the parents. If you think about it, think about that. Can I send Johnny off to the arcade, or can he sit here in the living room, play this game that's 20 times cheaper, and I can keep an eye on him? You know, it's an interesting thing how it all happened.
And in the 80s, the thing about the arcades was, as much as the games, it was a social experience. I mean,
sure was.
You went to the arcade to play games, but you also went there just to hang out with friends. I mean, you didn't have a cell phone, you couldn't call them, you couldn't talk to them, so you had no idea where they were at. So where do you go? You go to the arcade. Yep. Most of them are going to be there, or if they're not, they'll come in before the night's over.
Yeah.
And
that's the crazy thing. None of these kids have any idea.
And
you
so
know, my kid has no idea how that worked.
Now they've got cell phones. Now they call each other. Now they go do whatever they want.
Yeah,
and,
it's insane.
It was just a different time. We really didn't have any other options at the time. We had movie theaters and malls, and that was kind of the three things. And for most of the young kids, the malls weren't that big, and there was only so many new movies. And so, you know, for me, 3 to 5 times a week, I was hanging out at the arcade playing games after school.
Do you guys do any promotions, any tournaments, anything like that here?
We haven't started. So 2019, we had some pinball tournaments and stuff that started. And then, if you're familiar with Branson, in the winter, it goes really dead here.
Yeah.
And wish it wasn't that way. It's starting to improve, and I don't think it's going to stay that way, but right now it's a tough time. And then in March, COVID hit. And so just about the time we were hoping to really revive our leagues back up, COVID hit. And we were just talking up there since, so all the people that sanction the pinball leagues and things like that, they've totally shut that off. So you can't get a league sanctioned at this point where you accumulate points and progress in your standings. But I think I've heard recently that that's about to change in August.
Wow.
And so we were just talking about when do we want to think about reopening our leagues and our tournaments. And so I think that's going to be coming back, but we're probably a month away or so from that starting.
I do a lot of online tournaments. I work for a company called iArcade. They make a home arcade console.
Okay.
They license games. You can buy, Bad Dudes and tons of games on it. And so I run their tournament leagues online.
Okay, cool.
And so every week I'll do, last week we did Space Week. Did Space Harrier, Space Bomber, a new game by Psychic, and a Space Ace.
Nice.
So, and just random winners, trying to get as many people to play as possible. So if you just play, submit your score, and you could win a t-shirt sort of thing. So I've started a new show. Remember Starcade? From the 80s?
I don't.
The TV show Starcade?
I don't remember.
It was where you would have 3 games, and the contestants would play each game for a couple of minutes.
Actually, I do remember that when you said that, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm doing. I'm taking that concept and putting it online. Cool. And I'm doing tournaments with friends and different people.
Nice.
In the gaming community. So I'm kind of, I'm trying myself to keep it alive.
We got it.
Sort of thing.
It's going to take an effort to keep it going, but
definitely is.
it's coming back. The popularity of the '80s, you see it on even on TV and stuff like Domino's Pizza and the Noid.
Yeah.
You know, I've had a little original 1980s Noid figure up by the counter for a couple of years. And people ask me, what is it? Well, he was a famous character back from the 80s, sold a lot of people. And all of a sudden, he's back on TV now.
That show Stranger Things.
Yeah, Stranger Things, another great example.
For educating the public on the 80s culture.
That's awesome.
Because my kid now knows all about the 80s stuff. She loves it, wants to eat like 80s top ramen and all this stuff like from the show. So I was like, wow, okay, that's awesome. I guess I don't mind that show then.
It's pretty crazy how the popularity is coming back, and even music and stuff. A lot of the '80s groups are still out there, still performing, and they're popular.
It's because it was good stuff.
Yeah,
it was classic stuff.
It was a simpler time. People were basically friendly and accepting of everybody and everything for the most part.
Yeah.
And life was easy, and it was pretty happy and easy going.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
in some ways I wish it was more like that now than what it is.
I do. I personally do. I miss it for sure. Do you have any plans for the future for this place?
Just to keep growing.
Keep adding games?
Yeah, we've got lots of games that we want to do.
And you've got tons of space. You don't need to expand anytime soon.
We've got more space than we need. Obviously, with the pandemic, our party and event area has dropped off last year. We're starting to see that come back. We just had one of the local schools do a summer school event here this morning. We had almost 100 kids in here playing. And,
awesome.
You know, there's lots of reasons to do an arcade, but the best reason probably is to watch the young kids fall back in love with the very same games I did. There's probably nothing else that I like more than that.
Yeah.
It's great to have a business, it's great to have income, it's great to do all those things, but there's nothing like watching a young kid that comes in and he looks around and he's got that kind of bewildered look, and 30 minutes later he's on one of the games and he's rocking the joystick back and forth and pulling on it, and he's so into the game.
He's into it, yeah.
And that's probably the very best thing I've ever had happen here. It's hard to beat that.
I've had the same experience in my home arcade with my kid. She loves Crystal Castles.
Oh yeah, great game.
And before I got the arcade one up with Crystal Castles on, I didn't know that game. I'd never seen it before. And so me and her together learned about that game and learned all the warps and stuff. We can both get to the 5th level or whatever it is. Past the 4th warp, I don't know, it's like the 7th or 8th level. It's way up there. But we can get, 400,000, 500,000 points. We do really good on it.
Yeah.
And so we both learned that together, and that was really fun to do that. So yeah, man, it's awesome. I absolutely love
the other thing that's really cool, and you just have to hang out long enough to see it, but this was not true when I used to be in the arcade. When I used to be there, it was all younger people, probably, I don't know, 14, 15 through early 20s. That was it. Now, what's really cool is how many multi-generations that I see in here. And grandmas and grandchildren, or grandpas and grandchildren, they're playing games together side by side.
That's awesome.
And it's really cool to watch because when each side is experiencing a whole new side of the other one that they really have never got to experience before. The bonds are strong.
When I was a kid, my dad hated video games.
Yeah.
That was a total waste of time, complete waste of time, blah, blah, blah. Now look at us. Now it's turned into a business. We're actually monetized it somehow. So yeah, it's...
bringing those generations together has some intrinsic value that the 80s arcades didn't get to share. So it's really a cool thing, and I hope that in some weird way that revitalizes it even more.
I think it will.
It's one of the few things that I think is better now than it was in the 80s. Most of the things in the 80s were actually better as far as the arcades, but that particular thing wasn't there in the 80s, and I see it a lot.
That is a great point. It really is.
And I hope when we're done that we'll see a lot more of that. But I'm seeing it all the time. I see people playing air hockey together of different generations. I see, my fondest memory was a gentleman that came in. He was in his late 80s. He was on a cane. He was struggling with walking, moving really, really slow. I didn't even think there was any chance, that he was going to play. He was just with a group and a family. And they paid to get in. He came over here, and I introduced myself to him. And he goes, "Do you have a Miss Pac-Man?" And I'm like, "Sure, we've got a couple of them." And he said, "Where's it at?" And so I kind of got him over here. Took him a long time to get him here. He got sit down, and I kind of left. For the next 4 hours or so, that man stuck to Miss Pac-Man, and I got to watching him, and I'm telling you, he had some serious skill. His legs didn't move fast, but he could twitch his fingers and move the joystick faster than most people could imagine. And
that's awesome.
He was probably getting 150,000 quite regularly, and I was like,
that's awesome.
How cool is that, right? I mean, how many things at his age and the condition that he's in can he really go enjoy at that level? Yet he was in here for nonstop hours, and I suspect he did in his own day at the same time.